A heavy royal wax seal slammed against thick parchment. King Louis XIV had just personally ordered the arrest of a frail widow. She possessed no army. She plotted no rebellion. Yet the authorities viewed her as a direct threat to the established religious order. Her crime. It sounds almost impossible to us today. She had simply discovered a quiet, silent way to commune directly with God. No intermediaries, no empty rituals, just a simple prayer. And that prayer would lead her straight into the darkest, most terrifying dungeon in France. But what the guards didn't know was that they were only handing her the keys to absolute freedom. The year was 1648. France was just emerging from the smoke and blood of the 30 Years' War, entering an era where wealth and social status meant absolute survival. In the quiet, affluent town of Montargis, a girl named Jeanne-Marie Guyon de la Motte was born into high nobility. She possessed everything the world said a person should want. Picture a young noblewoman standing before a massive gold-rimmed mirror. You could hear the rustle of expensive silk against the polished floor. Her reflection showed a striking beauty that captured the admiration of French high society. Everyone who looked at her saw absolute perfection. But mirrors only show the surface. Underneath the silk and the praise, there was an invisible void, a quiet, gnawing emptiness she could not explain. We all know that feeling, don't we? That desperate attempt to fill a hole in our hearts with compliments, achievements, or the approval of others. Jeanne-Marie drank in the admiration of society. She tried to satisfy her soul with the fleeting vanities of court life. Yet the emptiness remained. It is a strange thing to have everything yet feel like you hold absolutely nothing of value. The mirror reflected a girl who had conquered society, but it could not show a soul that was slowly starving to death. At just 16 years old, that fragile illusion of control shattered. Her parents arranged a marriage for her. The groom was Jacques Guyon, a wealthy man, 22 years her senior, plagued by chronic illness. They met exactly 3 days before the wedding. She was a vibrant young girl. He was a sick older man. But in that era, a woman's duty was absolute obedience. The moment she stepped into her new home, she stepped into her first prison. Her mother-in-law despised her immediately. Every step Jeanne-Marie took was watched. Every word she spoke was criticized. The grand, spacious house quickly morphed into a suffocating cage. There were no iron bars on the windows, but the spiritual oppression was suffocating. She was cut off from friends, isolated, and constantly humiliated. What do you do when your own home becomes a place of torment? When the people who are supposed to protect you become your wardens? Most of us would fight back or surrender to resentment. But instead of reacting with bitterness, Jeanne-Marie did something completely unexpected. Picture a single flickering candle in the dead of winter. It is 4 a.m. The massive house is dead silent. While her husband and mother-in-law slept, the young bride quietly slipped out of bed. She knelt on the freezing wooden floorboards. There, in the absolute quiet, she began to seek God. Not with loud, eloquent speeches, just silence. A desperate reaching out for peace before the harsh demands of the day began. She thought this suffocating marriage was the worst punishment imaginable. She believed this house was her ultimate prison. But she did not know that a real dungeon, one 1,000 times darker and far more terrifying, was already waiting for her in the years to come. Then the shadow of death swept through France, a devastating outbreak of smallpox. It was a merciless disease that cared nothing for wealth, titles, or royal blood. Jeanne-Marie caught the infection. For days, she burned with a violent fever, her body aching as she hovered on the edge between life and death. When the illness finally broke and she was weak but able to stand again, she slowly walked back to that same gold-rimmed mirror. The reflection staring back at her was unrecognizable. The striking, flawless beauty that had defined her entire identity was completely destroyed. Her skin was permanently scarred, marked forever by the violent illness. For a young French noblewoman, this was an absolute catastrophe. It meant social ruin. The whispers of admiration would turn to gasps of pity. But she did not weep. She didn't scream or curse heaven. Instead, she felt something entirely different. She rejoiced. Perhaps in that scarred reflection, she saw freedom for the very first time. The cage of vanity was broken. The world could no longer validate her, which meant the world could no longer control her. Have you ever prayed for a way out of your struggles? Have you ever begged God to fix your situation and instead it felt like he remained silent? Or worse, he allowed the very thing you thought you needed most to be stripped away. We often ask God to change our circumstances, but sometimes his answer is to change us inside the circumstance. As the Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11, "I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content." Jeanne-Marie learned that brutal, beautiful lesson. Her beauty was gone, her youth was fading in a bitter marriage, her freedom was restricted by her mother-in-law. They could take everything from her looks, her youth, her external freedom, but they could not take what was within. Now I want to ask you, what prison are you facing in your own life right now? Illness, loneliness, or a broken relationship? Share in the comments below how God is teaching you to find freedom right in the middle of it. But finding peace in physical suffering was only the beginning of her true journey. By the time Jeanne-Marie was 20 years old, another storm was brewing. By outward appearances, she had settled into a tragic, quiet life. But inside, she was fighting a desperate spiritual battle. She read her Bible daily. She memorized long prayers. She performed every religious duty required of a respectable woman, yet the heavens felt like brass. She felt completely disconnected from God. One afternoon, a traveling Franciscan monk passed through her town. Desperate Jeanne-Marie confessed her spiritual dryness to him. She told him how hard she was trying to reach God. The monk listened quietly. Then he looked at her and said something that would alter the course of her entire life and eventually the course of French history. He said, "Madam, you are seeking from the outside what you already have within. Accustom yourself to seek God in your heart and you will find him." Those words struck her like lightning. She later wrote that in that very moment, her heart was pierced with an incredible sense of the presence of God. She stopped looking outward. She stopped performing empty rituals. Instead, she began to practice what she called quiet prayer. It was not about reciting words. It was not about holding a rosary. It was simply about resting in the presence of God, just sitting in silence, offering her heart to him. She no longer looked into the gold-rimmed mirror to find her worth. She looked inward, where the Spirit of God had made his home. In that silence, she found a love so profound that the bitter torment of her household simply faded away. She was physically trapped, but spiritually, she had just learned to fly. Life moved forward, bringing its inevitable tragedies and sudden shifts. In 1676, her husband, Jacques Guyon, passed away after a prolonged battle with his illnesses. Suddenly, she was a young, wealthy widow. For the first time in her life, the suffocating grip of her marriage and her cruel mother-in-law was broken. She was finally legally and financially free. But instead of returning to the glittering high society of France where she could have easily reclaimed her status and lived in absolute luxury, Jeanne-Marie did something that shocked everyone who knew her. She packed her bags, left her hometown, and dedicated her life entirely to God. She began to travel, and eventually she began to write. Sitting by candlelight, pouring out the simple truths she had learned in her darkest moments, she wrote a small, unassuming booklet. She titled it, "A Short and Very Easy Method of Prayer." The premise of the book was breathtakingly radical for its time. It proposed a scandalous idea that anyone, a poor dirt-stained farmer, an illiterate servant girl, a grieving widow, could experience the deep, transforming presence of God. They didn't need a theology degree. They didn't need to perform complicated, exhausting rituals. And most controversially of all, they didn't necessarily need an elite priest to act as a middleman between them and their Creator. All they needed was a surrendered heart and the quiet presence of Jesus Christ. It was a beautiful, simple message of pure grace. But in 17th century France, simple grace was considered incredibly dangerous. Her little booklet began to spread across the country like wildfire. It was passed from hand to hand, copied in secret, and read by the flickering light of hearth fires. Common people who had felt completely shut out by the rigid, elite religious system suddenly found profound hope. They were experiencing God directly in their homes, in their muddy fields, and in their quiet moments of despair. But as the book gained massive popularity, a dark storm was rapidly brewing among the religious elite. Think about the implications for a moment. In that era, the religious institution held absolute, terrifying power over the common people. They controlled access to God, they controlled salvation. But if a poor farmer could pray directly to God in his field and feel the Holy Spirit, why would he need the rigid institution? If a broken widow could find absolute peace in her own bedroom without performing the required rituals, what power did the authorities truly have over her? Spiritual freedom always threatens worldly power. The most powerful religious figure in France at the time, Bishop Bossuet, was terrified of this quiet revolution. King Louis XIV, a monarch who demanded absolute unquestioning control over the bodies and souls of his subjects, was furious. They viewed Jeanne-Marie not as a devoted, harmless Christian woman, but as a severe, imminent threat to the established national order. A woman teaching commoners to pray silently and find God on their own was entirely unacceptable. They launched a vicious, coordinated campaign against her. Her books were condemned by the church and burned in public squares. She was publicly branded as a dangerous heretic, a label that often carried a death sentence. The authorities gave her a final warning: stop writing, stop speaking, and publicly repent of her errors or face the absolute wrath of the king. As Jesus said in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 36, "If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed." Jeanne-Marie had tasted that true, unbreakable freedom. The religious elite could burn her books to ash, but they could not burn the peace out of her heart. She was ordered to remain silent to save her own life. She could have easily walked away. She could have retreated to a quiet country estate hidden behind her wealth and lived comfortably until old age. But Jeanne-Marie refused to be silenced. She refused to stop sharing the grace she had found. And that single uncompromising decision would trigger the most relentless, terrifying manhunt of the century, leading her straight into the cold darkness. The year was 1695. The heavy iron doors of the Bastille slammed shut with a deafening echo that reverberated through the cold, damp corridors. The Bastille was the most notorious, terrifying prison in all of France. It was a massive, imposing stone fortress designed specifically to break the minds and bodies of the king's worst political enemies. The cells were freezing, dimly lit, and swarming with rats and disease. It was a place where people were thrown into the dark and completely forgotten by the outside world. And now, sitting in one of those freezing rat-infested cells, shivering against the damp stone floor, wearing a thin dress that offered no protection against the biting cold, was a frail, middle-aged widow. It is almost entirely absurd when you think about it. King Louis XIV commanded the most powerful, heavily armed military in Europe. He lived in the spectacular sunlit palace of Versailles, surrounded by thousands of loyal guards and whispering nobles. Yet this mighty, absolute monarch was so deeply terrified of a woman who simply taught people how to pray silently that he personally signed the royal warrant for her arrest. An entire empire was threatened by the quiet faith of one woman. They stripped away her wealth and her titles. They took away her freedom to travel. They separated her from her friends, her followers, and her family. They locked her behind thick stone walls and heavy iron bars, plunging her into absolute isolation. The authorities hoped the brutal cold, the terrible food, and the crushing loneliness would finally break her spirit. They wanted her to beg for mercy. They wanted her to weep, retract her writings, and conform to their rigid religious system. But they severely underestimated the invisible, unbreakable strength of a soul anchored in God. She was placed in solitary confinement. For years, she had no paper, no pen, and absolutely no one to talk to. The physical toll was devastating. During the harsh winters, the freezing temperatures seeped through the stone walls, chilling her fragile bones. She suffered from terrible fevers and severe physical weakness. By every human metric, she should have fallen into total despair. She should have been weeping in the dark, asking God why he had abandoned her to such a miserable fate. But instead of weeping, Jeanne-Marie did something that completely bewildered the prison guards. She began to sing. In the dead of night, echoing through the cold, miserable corridors of the Bastille, the guards could hear the sweet, joyful voice of the widow singing hymns of pure praise. The darkness of the dungeon could not extinguish the light in her soul. Because she had no paper to write on, she composed poems and songs entirely in her mind, offering them up to God. She later dictated one of her most famous poems about her time in that cell. She said, "I am a little bird whom they have caught and caged, but I sing because the one who made me loves to hear my voice." She viewed her stone cell not as a place of punishment, but as a quiet, secluded chamber where she could commune uninterrupted with her Creator. It echoes the incredible moment in the book of Acts, chapter 16, verse 25. "And at midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises unto God, and the prisoners heard them." Just like Paul and Silas in the Philippian jail, Jeanne-Marie transformed her dark prison cell into a sanctuary of worship. The guards watched her in absolute shock. They could lock up her physical body, but they could not cage her spirit. She was the most physically confined person in France. Yet she was experiencing a level of spiritual freedom that the king in his palace could never even comprehend. It was in the darkness of the Bastille that the profound truth of her entire life finally came full circle. She realized that the Bastille was fundamentally no different from the grand suffocating mansion she had lived in as a young bride. As a teenager, her prison had been made of expensive silk social expectations and a cruel mother-in-law. Now her prison was made of solid rock iron bars and freezing temperatures. But the lesson was exactly the same. The walls around you do not determine your freedom. Your circumstances do not dictate your peace. Whether you are trapped in a golden cage of wealth and misery or a literal stone dungeon of persecution, if the presence of Jesus Christ is with you, you are completely free. Jeanne-Marie discovered that absolute surrender to God strips away the power of every earthly circumstance. The king could threaten her with death, but she had already died to her own desires long ago. The guards could take away her physical comforts, but her comfort was never found in the physical world anyway. She was untouchable. When you have truly surrendered everything to God, the world simply runs out of ways to threaten you. What can they take from you when you have already given everything to Christ? But the King of France was not a man who easily accepted defeat. He thought the terrible isolation of the Bastille would quickly break her mind. He was wrong. But the Bastille was not the final test of her faith. A new, far more insidious trial was waiting for her, one that would challenge not just her physical endurance, but her very reputation and legacy. The authorities quickly realized that the freezing cold stones and absolute isolation of the Bastille were simply not going to break Jeanne-Marie. So the religious elite, led by the powerful Bishop Bastille, shifted their strategy. If they could not crush her spirit with physical torment, they would destroy her with a weapon that cuts far deeper words. They decided to completely annihilate her public reputation. In the 17th century, a noble woman's honor was her absolute lifeline. It was more valuable than her wealth or her physical safety. Bossuet and his political allies began to spread vicious, highly calculated rumors about her across the country. They whispered to the public that her teachings of silent prayer were just a deceptive cover for deeply immoral behavior. They heavily and maliciously implied that she was having an inappropriate, scandalous relationship with a prominent, highly respected priest named Francois Fenelon, who was merely one of her closest spiritual friends and supporters. The rumors spread through the halls of the royal court like a deadly poison. The exact same high society that had once gazed into that gold-rimmed mirror and admired her striking perfection now eagerly consumed these scandalous, destructive lies. She was openly mocked. Her name became completely synonymous with public disgrace, scandal, and heresy. For many people, the deliberate assassination of their character is the ultimate breaking point. You can endure a cold prison cell, but when people relentlessly attack your integrity, your morals, and your purest intentions, it strikes a deeply vulnerable nerve. The religious elite knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to force her to furiously defend herself, to step out of her peaceful surrender and fight in the muddy, toxic arena of public opinion. They wanted her to panic to prove that her faith was a fraud. How do you respond when the world maliciously lies about you? How do you react when the people you tried to help turn around and accuse you of the darkest sins? Most of us would immediately hire lawyers, release statements, and fight tooth and nail to clear our good name. We have a desperate need to be understood and validated by the people around us. But Jeanne-Marie did not fight back. She offered absolutely no defense. She understood a profound spiritual secret. The desire to clear your name is often just a desperate attempt to protect your own ego. And her ego had died years ago in the quiet hours of the morning on those freezing wooden floorboards. She reportedly said that if God permitted her enemies to take away her reputation, then her reputation never truly belonged to her in the first place. Think about the mirror from her teenage years. The first mirror reflected her physical perfection, and God allowed smallpox to shatter it. The second mirror was her public honor and reputation, and now God allowed the religious elite to shatter that one too. She recognized that Jesus Christ himself was slandered. The Son of God was called a glutton, a drunkard, and a friend of terrible sinners. If the perfect Savior did not bother to defend his reputation against malicious lies, why should she? As Jesus taught in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5 verse 11, "Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake." Jeanne-Marie embraced this blessing. She allowed the mud to be thrown at her, knowing that her true identity was safely hidden in Christ, far beyond the reach of any human rumor. Eventually, after years of brutal imprisonment and public humiliation, the authorities realized they had completely failed. They could not force her to recant, they could not destroy her peace. So in 1703, they banished her to the quiet, isolated provincial town of Blois for the rest of her natural life. She lived out her final 15 years in forced obscurity, carrying a ruined public reputation. Bishop Bossuet and King Louis XIV probably thought they had won. They thought they had successfully buried her legacy in the dirt of scandal and exile. But they were entirely wrong. When you bury a soul that is completely surrendered to God, you are not burying a corpse. You are planting a seed. In her quiet exile in Blois, a steady stream of thousands of people from all across Europe, nobles, peasants, and seekers of truth, secretly traveled to visit her. They didn't care about the rumors. They came to sit with the frail, scarred woman and learn the simple, beautiful secret of finding God in the absolute silence. Her books, which had been burned in the public squares of France, were quietly translated and smuggled across borders, eventually sparking massive spiritual awakenings around the globe. The king's empire eventually crumbled. Bishop Bossuet is largely forgotten by history, but the quiet prayers of Madame Guyon are still echoing through the centuries. Jeanne-Marie Guyon faced 3 different prisons in her lifetime. Her first prison was made of expensive silk and social expectations, a bitter, suffocating marriage that slowly drained her youth. Her second prison was made of heavy iron and freezing stone, the terrifying dungeons of the Bastille. Her third and final prison was made of malicious words, a calculated attempt by the elite to completely destroy her reputation. Yet none of these prisons could hold her. She discovered a truth that terrified the authorities. She realized that true freedom is never found by merely escaping your circumstances. True freedom is found in absolute surrender to God within your circumstances. They could shatter her perfect reflection. They could take her physical freedom. They could destroy her honor, but they could never touch her soul. Perhaps today you are sitting in a prison of your own. It might be a chronic illness that limits your body. It might be a crushing financial burden, or perhaps it is a broken relationship that feels like a heavy chain around your neck. You have been desperately praying for God to break the walls down. But what if God is calling you to do exactly what Madame Guyon did? What if instead of asking God to change your circumstances, you asked Him to change you inside the circumstances? If you are ready to stop fighting the walls of your prison and instead surrender your heart entirely to God today, I want you to leave a comment below. Just write, "Lord, I surrender." Let that be your quiet prayer of freedom. If this story encouraged you, please share this video with someone who might be feeling trapped right now. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of faith. Remember the promise found in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 17, "Now the Lord is that Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty."